So, hello everybody, and welcome to the Voicing Centre on World Voice Day. And it's a real pleasure to have not one, but two vocal giants on with us today. Obviously, we're being joined by Ian Howell, who's here to talk about his book, Hearing Singing, A Guide to Functional Listening and Voice Perception. We're also joined by Dann Mitton, who has had the pleasure of editing the book and knows it very well indeed, who's going to be asking and guiding questions. And hopefully, we're going to involve you in your questions too. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over. Dan, would
Nice.
you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We're going to talk about the book that was released this year called Hearing Singing. You're seeing the glow of my ring light there on its glossy cover. But this is a guide to functional listening and voice perception by my friend and colleague Ian Howell. And this has been a minute in the making. Um, the book itself leans heavily on the discipline of psychoacoustics, and we want to just start with a quick frame of reference. So, Ian, in your own words, what would be the difference between regular old acoustics and
And
psychoacoustics?
psychoacoustics. Cool. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Debbie. Hello, everybody. It is so heartening to see so many people who have come out with some interest for a voice pedagogy slash voice science book. Really glad that you're here. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to talk about the ideas in the book and to maybe explore a couple sounds and talk about some elements of practical application to it. I suspect some of you may have cracked the book and started to read it, and some of you have just sort of, I'm obnoxious on Facebook about this sort of stuff, so maybe some of you have just sort of seen it and you don't actually know what it's about yet. So as we get through this time together, Dan and I welcome a wide range of questions that you might have, and I really hope that this can be sort of more about a conversation than like giving anything that looks even slightly like an academic lecture on this material. And so just to open up the expectations from the start, and I know, of course, there are stupid questions, right? But there are no dumb questions, right? So if anybody who has a question coming from a point of view of like you've read the book and like on page 86, what did I mean by, or if you haven't picked it up yet and you'd like to really refine your understanding of what you might be getting yourself in for, all is welcome.
I just
Yeah.
want to
So
amplify that
yeah.
by saying that open up your chat function and go ahead and put all the stupid and smart questions in there, and I will go ahead and curate them. So please, like there are no stupid questions. Just whatever your thought is, put it in the chat, and if I see it it creates a moment of opportunity, then it will make the main conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah. So psychoacoustics, sort of narrowly put, is the study of sound perception, and I think there are a number of doorways into that. You'll find people from lots of different fields think about this. Perception can be an element of like understanding sociology and culture and how it is that we use and receive sounds just to communicate. Psychoacoustics can certainly be thought of as an adjunct to language cognition. And so you'll find sort of similar threads that will tie you into linguistics and just sort of broader cognition fields. I think as soon as we invoke the word cognition, we have to think about like not only how it is that the brain receives stimulation, but also how it is that the brain stimulates the body in the first place. Like there are ways that the neurological reality of how it is that our brain drives our body and how our body sends information to our brain that really affects what are even practical ways to think about how we can train the voice. That is something I do address in this book. By and large, though, psychoacoustics and the way that I'm using it really has to do with the perception of radiated sound. And I think if you want to get into an argument with a bunch of strangers, like say something definitive about like perception is X, Y, or Z, like everybody will perceive blah. And like clearly that's not true because the way that the brain processes the information it receives is it's kind of a combination of physiological realities, like the actual meat and gristle and nuts and bolts and bones and tendons that transmit acoustic information from the outside world, where it's just like wiggles in the air, into the physical world inside our hearing mechanism, which is where the process of auditory transduction takes place, where like a radiated pressure pattern in the air suddenly becomes mechanical motion of various structures within our outer, middle, and then inner ear. And eventually there's a process by which that acoustic energy goes from mechanical energy to then electric energy, where the inner ear, there's a snail shell like structure in your inner ear called your cochlea, which goes through a process that sends a repeated series of electrical pulses to your auditory cortex. And then at that point, everything that you understand about the world, the inventory of sounds that you have previously heard, your upbringing, the character of your language, your musical culture, will then imbue that series of electrical pulses with meaning. And you'll begin to experience what might be called the timbral reality of the world. I think that the fact that like psychoacoustics as a field, really it points to the idea that there is incredible variation. There's incredible variability between the ways that different people can experience the same auditory stimulus. It can lead us to believe that perception is like hopelessly varied, and that we can't actually drill down to anything more specific or anything more actionable. And one of the primary arguments of the book is that, yes, different people will notice different things in the same auditory stimulus, and the same person might notice different things on different passes. To me, that's not the interesting question. To me, the interesting question is, what happens when you train your, I'm going to say, hearing brain, so all the various processes that allow you to process stimuli that come in acoustically, what happens when you train yourself to notice dependable properties of that pressure pattern that point directly to functional aspects of how it is that the voice makes sound? So yes, play the same sound for 100 people and you will get perhaps generously 50 different responses as to what the nature of that sound was. To me, that's the uninteresting question. To me, the interesting question is, if I am training somebody to sing in a way where there's going to be a powerful standing wave in the vocal tract that oscillates 3 times for every 1 time the vocal folds come into contacting, those of you who do any sort of work with acoustics, you would say, oh, that's a strong third harmonic on the spectrum. One of my sound samples is actually this. I'll play it for you in a minute. The interesting question is like, well, what's the qualitative aspect? Like what is qualitatively true about that strong third harmonic? Can I train myself to hear it? Can I give myself a set of labels that will dependably allow me to parse that part of the sound out from other aspects of the sound? And can I then use that knowledge to really listen in when a client or a student is singing in front of me and be able to evaluate whether they have done that thing or not? I feel like so much of how it is that we train singers, like we have a lot of knowledge about like the meat and gristle and the bits and bobs and like how things, like what your abdomen should be doing, right? And I think it's actually not particularly productive to evaluate whether that person has done that thing with their abdomen correctly based on what their abdomen looks like. Like all that actually matters is like, what did it do to the sound? What was the change in the sound? And I think all of us here are either singers or voice teachers somehow associated with it. Like, I think we should all be able to get on the same page and say that we are here to affect changes in the sound. We are not here to tinker around with what it is that the singer is doing. We are not here although it's great if it makes their life more pleasant, we are not here solely to try to make people more happy, right? We are trying to change their function to the point that it changes the sound. And if we do not have a language to understand with any nuance whether that sound has changed, I literally, man, I don't know what we're doing. Like, I don't know what any of this training is actually for. So psychoacoustics in the context of this book is really to focus in on a handful of dependable, reliable, qualitatively opposable. I'm gonna invoke a word here. Your word for the day is percept, and a percept is just like your mental representation of some sort of sensory stimulus. So your mental representation of some aspect of a sound would be a percept. To drill down to dependable, repeatable, qualitatively opposable percepts that tell us something important about the function of the singer. That is the context in which I use the word psychoacoustics.
I love that. So thank you for clearing that up for those of us who are new to the term psychoacoustics. And I'm just going to quote you back to yourself here for the sake of all of our friends. One of the things that I loved so much about what you wrote is that you don't leave us to an encyclopedia list of ways to like of new vocabulary words. It's to quote you, perception of the singing voice can be characterized by just a few continuums of qualitatively opposing aspects of sound. So for me, that as someone who was new to this literature, it meant that I don't have a new, dogma to learn. It, as a matter of fact, builds, I think, on trends that we see in voice pedagogy. Some of us may remember the paper that was put out 10 years ago by Herbst and Svech on glottal configurations and how they narrowed it down to breathy and pressed or like these kinds of qualitative oppositions. And it was a very easy to understand model. Akin to that is the idea of buzzy or bright or warm or all of these adjectives that you're using. And that's what was new to me as a new reader to your work. Do you want to speak a little bit about the simplicity that comes after all of the background and situation? Like the way the book is structured gives us a lot of background and then we get to that meat.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe this is a good moment just to zoom out and talk about the structure of the book then. So it's assembled in 12 chapters, and there is then an epilogue, and there are a couple of appendices. Starting with those appendices real quick, I put together an appendix called How to Read Graphs Related to Voice Production. And I suspect most of us who have tried to like sort of tiptoe up to the waters of voice science or some sort of evidence-based approach to understanding the voice have read science-y books that show spectrograms or spectra or waveforms. There's like these visual representations of sound. And I think it is very easy to just assume that it makes sense, right? That's like, oh, I'm looking at a spectrogram and I understand what it is that I'm looking at. And so I actually wrote a chapter that sort of walks you through step by step what it is that each of these images are and what the mathematical processes are that create them. And then there's another appendix that is a list of labs. And so I put together like 28 labs that you can do on your computer. You can do them with Voce Vista video. You can do them with Pratt, which is a free application. And you can record your own sounds if you want, but I also provide audio samples for most of them. So you'll be able to pull the sounds apart in the way that I lay out in the book on your own computer. There's kind of three big sections to the book now. There's an introduction. There's a chapter that's called How We Got Here, which tells a bit of a story about how it is that the voice pedagogy community tends to receive information from the scientific community and how that can be both wonderful and also a barrier, because frequently we do not engage the ideas that that complex scientific models point to, we engage the details of the models themselves. And that can create a situation where we end up putting a fair amount of effort into learning complex taxonomy, a complex set of labels, and we basically end up understanding how those labels interact with each other within a model, rather than understanding how those labels point to real phenomena in the body. And we think about how it is that the body interacts, or we think about how it is that we perceive different aspects of the sound. And then there's a chapter 3, which is called Refining Models for Understanding the Singing Voice, in which I begin to point to what I would call an end-to-end model to understand how it is that the voice actually produces sound, which is something I hope we can talk about today. It's pretty crazy if you actually think about it, all the way through how that sound radiates in spaces and how it is that the ear then receives that sound. I think we respond to narratives, we don't respond to lists of facts. And I think that there is a great value in being able to tell a story to ourselves, be able to tell a story about how it is that the singer actually made the sound and what qualities we are actually receiving into our brain through the process of auditory transduction in that sound. And if you can't actually start at the beginning and walk all the way to the perception of the sound, you probably have a gap in your knowledge that might negatively impact your functional understanding of how it is that the voice can work.
I'm
So
super
that's,
excited, sorry, Ian, about the
yeah,
gap in
please.
the knowledge too. It's particularly in chapter 3, and I wondered at this as an editor of the work, because you give us 3 passes on the nature of the ear and its physiology and anatomy. The first one is a basic model, and we know that all models are flawed, right? So you give us a basic model, you give us a simple model, and then you give us a more complex model of the ear. And through these 3 passes, you allow the reader to aim for what's important rather than getting snowed in how to spell the word stapes, right? Which is
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
But
yeah.
the point is, you don't get it's rare to see such a kind, thorough, and methodical exposure to this information at this level.
Well, I had graduate students and I watched them not be able to understand for many years. And so I progressively came up with a system of like, here is the gist. And I feel like we don't start with the gist enough with a lot of these complex ideas. So here's the gist. Here's here's the way in which I was lying to you with the gist. And then here's the way in which I lied to you with the way in which I was lying to you with the gist. And I feel like you can sort of progressively build the complexity out, but you still I don't know if this makes sense. This is the way my brain works. You still understand what the verbs are, right? You're not just bogged down with a bunch of discrete pieces of information. You understand how each new piece of information is enlivening a process, and you never lose sight of the process itself.
So, in terms of curating this information, I just love what you've done with the idea of it's sort of the Goldilocks passes, right? Like this is the first, and then simple, and then and more
Yeah.
complex. By the end of that process, and also you're building a relationship with the reader so that they're not feeling, at least I hope this is the case, they're not feeling snowed with detail at the beginning.
Yeah.
We have our eye firmly fixed on what's the point of this? Why am I learning these details? So I
That
liked that.
that is certainly my aim. So that's kind of the first chunk of the book. That's the first third of the book is sort of broad overview of how it is that we think about acoustics and perception within the voice pedagogy literature, an introduction to like why some of the challenges that exist might exist, and then an introduction to how it is that the hearing mechanism itself actually works and how we might be able to tie our understanding of that to our understanding of voice perception.
I can't
The
resist just hitting the like that you grounded in the literature for me is huge. And
Oh yeah.
if there are points where folks are, finding an assertion hard to digest or just a little confused or want more information, the in-text citations that you have for this stuff are all findable and they're all just really illuminating. And that is something that I really admire in this kind of new, more user-friendly strain of voice pedagogy literature for these complex topics.
Yeah, I write in the introduction that this is not really a voice pedagogy book because it's not solely focused on practical application, like reducing things just to the level that we think is necessary for practical application, and it is definitely not just a voice science book. Like it's sort of somewhere in between. And my goal, I even lay out a choose your own adventure map at the beginning. Like if you are this kind of person encountering this material in this context, read the chapters in this order. If you're this kind of person, skip these chapters and jump immediately to this other chapter first. If you're programming these chapters for like use in a voice pedagogy curriculum, like these chapters will be useful in this way, these chapters will be useful in this different way. The middle section, the chapter 3 ends with this concept of introducing pitch, auditory roughness, and tone color. And the middle section of the book is like an academic and experiential exploration of those three things. I argue, and these ideas are not particularly like unique to my mind. Like Dan said, there's a ton of historical support for these things. And as much as possible, I try to point people outward to the literature so that they can, I mean, to an extent, see that I'm not just making it up or like hallucinating this stuff, right? But just to show that there's this long history of people thinking about these things that, like, for one reason or another, just haven't situated themselves within the voice pedagogy literature. And I think it's not because people like reasoned through it and decided not to. I think there are bodies of knowledge that we haven't discovered yet as a community. But anyway, pitch, auditory roughness, and tone color. These basically point to three continua of qualitative opposition that we will hear within a voice. So pitch, you would think it's like, well, the pitch is like the black dot on the page and it goes up or it goes down. And that's what pitch is. But I'll read just a little excerpt from the chapter on pitch. So despite the fact that like the official definition is that quality of a periodic sound that allows you to order it on a scale from low to high with other periodic sounds, I would like to draw your attention to three nuanced ideas that coexist in the idea of pitch. So first of all, pitch is an organizing property of sound. So we can compare two periodic, and periodic just means repeated. Something has to be periodic for us to perceive pitch. We may compare two periodic sounds and order them as lower or higher than each other along the pitch continuum. For example, C5 is an octave above middle C. It's higher than C4. C5 is also higher than B4, which is a seventh above middle C, but by a smaller increment in the pitch space. So that's one way to define pitch. A second way to define pitch is that some sounds are pitched and others are noise. So pitched sounds feature the periodic, the regular repetition of pressure changes. Noise, in a scientific sense, features aperiodic pressure changes. So in your imagination, compare a piano tone with the sound of a cymbal crash. The two are qualitatively different from one another. The sound of the cymbal does not just lack pitch, it doesn't just lack periodicity, it is a kind of noise. And then I would say some definitions of noise include a cultural judgment based on whether the sound is unwanted or a nuisance. So if something's pleasant, it's not noise. If something is annoying, it is noise. But just in the raw sense of it, there's something qualitatively different about an aperiodic versus a periodic noise. But then I think the interesting third definition of pitch for voice teachers is that the idea of pitch contains complex oppositions. So when we consider a given sound, we can understand that some qualitative aspects of that sound may convey pitch, and other qualitative aspects of that sound do not convey pitch. So I'm going to play you a sample in about 30 seconds. So that means within any single pitched sound, a part of, I'm going to say the spectrum, so that's just like the qualitatively slower portions pressure change wise, and the qualitatively different faster portions, the lower frequency and the higher frequency aspects of the sound. Some portion of the spectrum elicits a pitch percept, and some portions of the spectrum do not. So a perfectly pitched sound will have aspects that in isolation are noisy. A really dramatic, like bop it on the nose example of this is breathy phonation. And I think if we think about it and you listen to a sound like ah, just something like that, you can hear that there is a very warm woo quality to that sound, and there's like a turbulent, noisy quality to that. So just like on its face, that is a way to understand breathy phonation. We would say there's a warm pitched component, and then there is a chaotic noisy component. But even within, if that is disorganized noise, that's like turbulent randomness, within otherwise very periodic singing, very periodic tone created by a musical instrument, you will hear very noisy components. So I'm going to go to Zoom and I'm going to share my Voce Vista real quick. And we went ahead and set these levels before, but somebody just unmute and give a shout if for some reason this is not coming through clearly. So I'm going to play a recording of a voice, and I'm going to start from the brightest components, and then I'm going to slowly fade in the warmer and warmer components, the slower rates of pressure change. And just notice when it is that you hear the pitch pop in. So I would argue like there's a good deal of this sound that has a clear pitch quality to it. And there's a good deal of this sound that I would generously characterize as noisy. And it does not as effectively convey the pitch information. Now, this is not unique to a voice. So this is a recording of a cello, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. And I just want you to notice when it is that your perception of the pitch kicks in. And I feel like this axis here, which is frequency, should probably actually be age because like as we're all getting older, like we're losing high frequency response. And so like I tick down to a certain point and I'm like, oh, yep, I'm 50. I can hear that. But like I know my 10-year-old daughter can hear it higher, right? So probably even among this group of friends, different people will hear the sound itself kick in at different moments. Okay. So again, even with this cello, we have a part of it that strongly characterizes the pitch, and then we have another part of it that does not convey a ton of pitch information. So that's a way to understand pitch. It's like the slower components of the pressure pattern will basically dependably elicit a pitch perception, and all of the faster rates of change will not. Now, the second property, so we have pitch, and then we have auditory roughness. Auditory roughness is like a fancy science word to say buzzy. And I don't know, we've been around voices our whole life, and probably it's like, yeah, I understand that there's like, sometimes a voice has warmth, and sometimes it has like edgy cut, and sometimes it has like a real buzzy, glassy quality. Like, I think I think we know these sounds, right? And to an extent, like the way that singers balance these signifiers determine genre, right? So if you imagine Nina Simone singing in her lower range, would you expect there to be a whole bunch of edgy cut, or is that predominantly a warm coded sound? If you imagine Ethel Merman singing like a B flat 4 or a C5 on a belty sound, would you imagine there to be no buzziness? Like, no, probably you'd expect there to be a good deal of buzziness, right? It's like these qualitative elements of the sound kind of end up defining genre because it defines the way that it is that we choose to use the voice. So buzziness is actually a physiological response to the ear being stimulated in a certain way. Like you have to have faster oscillating components to a sound. And when you do, it dumps a bunch of energy into what's called a critical band of hearing. A critical band of hearing is just a physical length on a structure inside your inner ear, which is where most of the frequency filtering takes place physiologically. And it's kind of fun to think about it. It's like buzziness as a percept is not because the voice is somehow doing something buzzy. Like buzziness as a percept is because your ear cannot resolve such finely detailed information. The faster and faster the frequency components of the voice get, the more closely clustered they are on that structure in your cochlea. And your brain gets confused. Like in a similar manner to if you are looking at two people standing right next to each other, 2 football fields distance away, like your eye may be able to tell that there's an object there, but it can't separate out. You may not know that there are two people there. You just see kind of like, well, there's a blob there. And as you get closer, the resolution of your eye allows you to see that detail. When the ear gets confused when sounds are too physically close to each other, and it sounds like 2 plus 2 is a bag of bagels, but the way that we hear that is buzz. It sounds buzzy. So then you can start to ask yourself, okay, if I can hear that the lower part of the spectrum is going to really sound like the pitch and it's not going to be buzzy at all, and I would like to push the word pure. I think that makes some intuitive sense in opposition to buzzy. It's simple, it's uncomplicated. And I can hear that part of the singing voice that has that buzzy quality, and I can notice that buzzy is not pure and pure is not buzzy. Then all we have to do is ask that, I think we ask the interesting question. And the interesting question is, how does the voice make a pure versus a buzzy sound? Like functionally, what does that? And so the last section of the book is basically trying to pull that together. Like these are practical application chapters. Chapter 11 is called, and I was nervous to write this, but I took a chance. It is titled How to Teach Singing. And then chapter 12 is titled Pedagogic Practices and Functional Listening Examples. So if you go through the middle parts of the book, you'll start to notice that any sound can really be broken up into opposable, qualitatively different properties, right? The one that I haven't mentioned is tone color, which is just to say lower frequency sounds have a much more like ooh like quality, and higher frequency bright sounds have a much more e like quality. And most of the signifiers that we tend to think identify or characterize vowels fall somewhere between that ooh and that e quality. I will once again just play this. Sorry, there we go. Play this sample here. Just listening to a cello, like this isn't even a voice because tone color has nothing to do with a voice doing it. A mosquito will make this. Hawk making a sound outside will similarly have tone color appropriate to its frequency range. But if you listen to just the slowest components of this cello string, I have yet to meet the person who, when confronted with that sound, says, oh yeah, that sounds like a kid screeching, or that sounds like wet city bus brakes squealing, right? Like nobody says, oh yeah, if I was going to imitate that onomatopoeically, I would go, "Eh." Like I haven't met the person yet who says that. But frequently people will say, oh yeah, I would go like, ooh, ooh, that's how I would imitate that sound. When we compare that to the much faster components, I have not yet met the person who says that is what a mourning dove sounds like. Ooh, 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 right? It's like we don't intuitively say that's what that sounds like. Instead, we'd be like, oh, that sounds like mosquito wings. That sounds like a bright sound. If I was going to imitate it, I'd go like ee, right? That's how human voices make their tone color, and that's how I would make a sound that dumps energy into that same frequency range.
Before we
And
move too much, sorry,
yeah,
Ian, to jump in. Am I crushing a point that you were just about to?
no, it's
No.
okay. I'll
I
pull it
just
through.
want good. I just wanted to mention in the chat that we're having the predictable hand up. I see Sarah and Helen and Tony are all curious about. Well, let's read the question here. Sarah was pointing out that she can hear. Am I a freak because I do perceive pitch in the higher parts?
No.
And Helen says, but do you hear pitch in the higher components, just not the same pitch that the lower frequencies elicit? And then Tony had come in and said something like, are we confusing harmonics with pitch? So do you want to just take
Yeah,
a
very cool.
sentence or two?
So I would say what the literature suggests is that we have a pretty hard cutoff for pitch accuracy above 5 kilohertz. So ideally, if you're like an 8-year-old and you've never been to a rock concert, like your hearing is from 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. And like for most of us living in the world, it's the upper frequency is much lower. But the upper frequency for pitch perception is typically referred to as 5 kilohertz. And that's because the nerve that would send the periodic signal to the auditory cortex cannot fire fast enough. It's like a physiological limit, neurological limit. It can't fire fast enough to represent periodicity faster than 5 kilohertz. The way that the perception literature works is a little bit maddening, right? And I said at the beginning, it's like, well, it's like perception's a little bit squishy, and does that mean we can't do anything with it? No, but like one of the ways in which perception is squishy is if you listen to a higher frequency portion of a periodic sound, you may well hear something that sounds pitched. The question is only, do 75% of the people guess wrong when presented with that? Like perception literature is about thresholds. It's not about light switches. And so one of the things frequently you'll find, Sarah, is like you do hear a pitch, right? Frequently it's just not actually the right pitch. Frequently it's a little bit off, or your ear really latches on to a strong periodic oscillation that we would see as a higher harmonic. So you're not hearing the slower repetition that would correspond to how fast the vocal folds themselves are moving, but you're hearing a faster oscillation of a resonance. And so it's not that the higher you get up in the spectrum, suddenly everything sounds like a wind turbine, right? It's like that's not the opposition. The question is really, it's sort of a qualitative evaporation of being able to accurately perceive the real pitch. I personally, I think pitch is interesting, and it's an idea we need to be grounded in. I think it is such a liminal transition that we do a lot better just to think in terms of sort of pure warm versus buzzy bright. And you may or may not hear something clearly in the buzzy bright. So Sarah, I don't think you're a freak. Not for this reason anyway. I will leave the leave the door open, but I don't think that is strange at all. And I'll frequently do large group listening challenges. And one of the things that we'll do is sort of start with the very brightest parts of the sound and slowly introduce things. And it's really interesting. You ask people to hum the pitch, and it starts out at the beginning and it's like a cacophony. And then it's like the THX thing at the beginning of movies where it like slowly gathers to a single pitch as you introduce more and more. So it's really more about accuracy than any sort of like a light switch or a threshold that is thrown.
If we can just step back from that to appreciate it, I was resistant because I'm a person who really likes to know. And I was resistant to your schema of qualitative oppositions. It's so simple. How can it be useful? How can it point to anything learned or precise or definite? And letting go of my need for a binary switch was
Yeah.
essential to starting to be able to use this in the studio. And I do use these words, warm and bright, or pure and buzzy. I do use that in the studio, but it was a long time coming because I wanted to say more voicey stuff about function than more general stuff and usefully general stuff about
Yeah.
perception. So I think that's the big idea you're selling here is the usefulness of the simplicity of the rollout of these ideas.
Yeah, and I'd like to. I'm looking through the chat and just to sort of try to tie together a few things. I see that Tony. Hi,
Angelina's
Tony.
asked, just because we've had quite a bit of chat since then,
Yeah, yeah.
in case it's missed, Angelina's asked, at what point does perception switch from the mechanically possible to the interpretive realm?
Yeah, very cool. So that's a really interesting question. Tony's question about noticing like the fundamental in a cello at a different breakpoint from the voice. Um, Ivan mentioned the same thing, and there was one more. No, that's about it. I think these are all questions that point to this variability. And the fascinating thing is you can train your ear to notice all of these things. So for example, you might hear a high frequency cluster and you'll hear some like really fast whistling overtone that's at a harmonic multiple of the fundamental. And you'll hear that as a distinct pitch. A novice who like never listens to music might not hear that. And that is something that they could be trained to hear. And the interesting question in my mind is not, does everybody hear the same thing on a first pass? The interesting question in my mind is, if you train yourself to notice certain aspects that are present in the sound that have a representation in the acoustical signal, but fundamentally are a result of the process of auditory transduction and cognition, if you train yourself to notice those things, can you dependably notice them? In my mind, that's the only thing that matters. And so I would anticipate that there's variability. I would anticipate that most people do not engage listening to a singing voice with the kind of critical approach that most of us probably would like to get good at. And so I think the singing voice is an amazing communicative device that is it is a revelation of the human soul and the way that we can use changes in timbre and inflection to communicate to somebody else that like they are not alone trapped in their mortal experiences that they are having. It is incredibly amazing. And at the same time, the fundamental up to about the pitch C5 is going to have a ooh like quality to it, right? And so these are very distinct ways to encounter the voice. And I'm drawing a very tiny box around this because I think it's practical. And so if you accept the notion that like slower frequency components of the sound are going to have a darker tone color, are going to have a more pure quality, and are really you're going to find them listening for your percept of the pitch, we should start asking ourselves functionally, how does the voice make slow components of the sound? And similarly, if you understand that you can qualitatively hear the bright components of the sound, we should start asking ourselves functionally how it is that the voice makes fast pressure changes. And so the last couple chapters, like the practical application ones, really some of it is like from a process based point of view. This is how I think we should teach voices. This is how to get a singer to organize their thoughts so that the stimulus from their brain is dependably eliciting the best result possible. That is definitely in there as well. But there's also just a narrative that tells the story. Like if we haven't actually thought about how it is that the voice makes sound, it is amazing, right? So it's not that the vocal folds make a buzzing sound, which is then filtered by the vocal tract. Like that's a very simple way to lay out and describe this phenomenon. Like really what's happening is it's a series of pulses. It's a series of pulses of airflow. And the role of the vocal folds is not so much, I get in trouble when I say these things, but I really think this is true. It's like the vocal folds aren't actually making the sound. any more than any other part of the system is making the sound. What the vocal folds do is they hold back air, and then as they part, they allow the air to flow, and it does not flow all at once. It typically there's like a ramp. I never know what's left and right, so assuming this is left, it like ramps up relatively slowly. This is all insanely fast. It ramps up that airflow relatively slowly, and then as the vocal folds come to contact, as that part of the cycle, that flow drops. And so we can think about it as that. It's like, oh, it's a flow pulse that ramps up and drops. And if you have very like, like very simple, pure warm phonation like that, the ramp up and the drop are almost symmetrical. It's not a fast drop. The edgier, the brighter, and the more cutting the sound gets, typically we say that that drop takes place faster and faster. But like that actually is not the sound. The sound occurs when that air that is flowing runs into the mass of air that's in the vocal tract. And like probably most of us, that mass of air in the vocal tract does not like to be pushed. And so rather than just allowing that pulse to like flow out of your mouth, instead what happens is that air mass stiffens. And so it is like that flow pulse is slapping the air, and the air resists and it stiffens, and the air molecules get pushed together, and that forms a high pressure front. So then like, oh, okay, well now we have a pressure change. That must be the sound. But that flow pulse is so gradual that actually that's typically not strong enough to be most artistic singing. Really what happens is then that pressure region sort of like gathers and is slowly flowing against the resistance of the air mass in the vocal tract, and then the vocal folds shut off the flow of air. And in shutting off the flow of air, that high pressure front, suddenly there's no new air being put in, and so there's a sudden drop in pressure above the vocal folds. And that is the first time that there's been a fast enough pressure change to make something that would propagate as a sound wave. And so the source of the voice is actually a pressure change in the air mass above the vocal folds that occurs after the vocal folds have touched. It's not actually the flow of air through the vocal folds. It is the way that flow of air interacts with the mass of air above the vocal folds. Okay, so if you are still with me at this point, if we ask like where are slow and fast pressure changes in that regime, the slow parts of the pressure changes are in building up that higher pressure front. And the fastest parts of that pressure change are in the snap to low pressure after the vocal folds come in contact. That means anything that increases the throughput, like of the flow pulse, the volume of air that passes through the glottis, is going to correspond to the warmer parts of the sound, to those purer parts of the sound, necessarily, right? It's the part of the process that makes the slow pressure changes. Slower, they are all again. This is incredibly fast. What are warm sounds? Breathy is a very warm sound. Yeah. That is a very warm sound. It is characterized by the volume of air that flows past the vocal folds. What is it that makes that drop in pressure? It is really in a lot of ways how quickly the vocal folds shut off the flow of air. And I would say this is all a continuum. I'm going to say there's two ways to do this. Of course, that's wrong. But there are two ways to characterize how this could be done. One of them is muscular medialization of the vocal folds toward the midline. If you do not let the vocal folds part particularly far, they do not have to travel very far to get back to the midline. And so that closing is going to take place relatively rapidly compared to how much time it took for the flow to ramp up. That tends to be what we would call pressed phonation. If you qualitatively think about what pressed phonation is, it is the presence of brightness and buzziness in the absence of warmth. It is not necessarily even more brightness and buzziness than you would want from like a really robust, full-throated, flow phonation, loud, robust sound that you might want to make with unamplified singing. It's not even necessarily more brightness than that. It is just, it does not have the warmth. The other way to get that fast shutoff of air is to have the underside of the vocal folds meet deeply relative to the depth of contact of the vocal folds. This tends to be what we see in like robust flow phonation singing. We see that the vocal folds are pushed apart and a relatively high volume of air is actually allowed to flow through, which stores up a lot of pressure in the vocal fold air, in the air mass above the vocal folds. And then it is the underside of the vocal folds, because their depth of contact is deep and they are not pushed together, so they're able to have a fairly wide excursion. It's that underside touches, and as soon as that happens, it rapidly shuts off the flow of air. So then you have a high pressure front, that's the warm part of the sound, that suddenly snaps to a low pressure front, that's the bright part of the sound. And so just even thinking from a basic functional, like how on God's green earth does the voice make sound, we can start to understand that the behavior at the glottal level is going to create warm, pure, or bright, buzzy aspects of the sound. Now, of course, the voice is not just the glottis and the air mass directly above it. The way the rest of the vocal tract is shaped has a profound effect on it. We put narrowings in all sorts of places. I have a whole section in the latter part of the book that kind of explores how the sound dependably changes depending on where you put different narrowings in different parts of the vocal tract. And those narrowings all create their own high pressure regions, which then result in super fast flow of air that decreases the pressure, right? So there's radical rapid pressure changes that take place within the vocal tract. We tend to call those resonances, like we kind of sanitize it, but like really, if you think about it, it's like violent rushing and changing in flow, and these pressure patterns get set up and then resonate. So you can also think about if you want to get like a super bright sound, and I'm just going to look at my audio level to make sure I don't distort. So if I suddenly get quiet, it's because I'm about to sing a loud note. So you can certainly think about if you have, there we go. If you have that kind of phonation, you can intuit like something is not changing fast enough. And then if your brain is like, I'll solve that, right? And you sort of over medialize muscularly with the vocal folds, you get some of the brightness that is your target, but you lose a lot of the stability and you lose a lot of the warmth. Like the flow phonation ideal, that sort of sound is going to have a lot of strong warmth, but it also has a ton of buzzy brightness in it. And then if you can teach yourself how to have that level of, I guess I want to say efficiency, or like adducted enough, but not too much, then you can start playing with narrowings further downstream. And so instead of sort of getting all the narrowing here, you can play with tongue being up in the mouth. Right? And just by positioning the tongue, you don't lose the warmth in the sound, but you gain a bunch of pointiness in the sound. And like, want to make those specific sounds or not, just as a way to demonstrate the idea that there are ways to bring like really powerful, dependable brightness into the sound that don't mess with the warmth. In my mind as a teacher, like that's the sauce, because then you can create what in the book I call intermediate or adjacent functions, which is to say, let's say, and it's not that all the examples in this book are about a baritone trying to sing up into higher pitches, but this is what my body is right now. So like hypothetically, if you have somebody who's like, thus saith the Lord of hosts, because they have in their ear that they're supposed to make like a bright sound, but clearly that lacks power. You could waste a lot of their tuition having them start with that and then be like, right, but like think more open throat. Then it'll be like, thus saith the Lord, right? And it's like, well, you've changed the sound, but I don't know that you've really gotten them to the actual target. What's missing? Is what's missing the brightness, or is what's missing the warmth? I would say what's missing is the warmth. What makes warmth? A higher rate of airflow makes warmth. What is a function that will have this singer experience a higher rate of airflow? It has nothing to do with singing that opera. That aria. The function that will get them there is more like, oh, right? And you establish that basic airflow setup because you knew they were missing the warm part. And so you let go of the stage target, yeah, just for a little bit. And then you can walk them from that to progressively the clearer and clearer sounds because you've read my book and you understand if you put the tongue in a certain place, it'll bring that clarity back into the sound. And then that'll get you from saith the Lord of hosts, right? And then you have like, you have the flow, you have the power, you have the warmth in the voice. You got the brightness back. You didn't do it in a way that diminished the warmth and the power. So like, that's just an example. There's 10 more examples that are different.
Ian, just in the last 3 minutes that we have, surprise, that was our hour. I want to return to the title of the book, Hearing Singing. We've had a deep dive into what's creating these sounds, but how we're receiving them is the point. Well, it's basically the moniker of the book. And I wanted to ask you if you could share a little bit. It's not just reading your book that communicates this, but it's the series of building labs. You have integrated labs into each chapter where folks can go online and they can actually hear audio resources, and you instruct people how to play with stuff. Can you talk about that just a little bit before we're done?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, can we pin that real quick? Because there are some excellent questions in the thread that I feel like I can answer pretty quickly. Um, okay, so Sarah asked, what about the relation to laryngeal position and airflow? This is so important, and this is something that I cover. It just at a basic physiological level, like the greater the diaphragm expresses itself, the greater it pulls down. I am dramatically oversimplifying respiration, but the greater that it is able to pull down, the greater its range of motion, the more the structures underneath it are going to pull down. And you can feel the trachea moves just a little bit. And I do not know if this is controversial, but it sure seems real to me that tracheal pull is a real thing. And when that pulls the cricoid cartilage, is the top ring of the trachea, down, the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage hinge at the back. And so as the cricoid cartilage is pulled down, it's not pulled down, it's actually pulled down and a little diagonally back because the larynx is so anterior in the throat, it has to go diagonally down to go down. And in doing that, it actually opens the space between the cricoid and thyroid cartilages, which increases that mobility. And that's one thing it does. And the other thing it does, I do not understand the mechanism, but I trust the people who've told me that this is true. The higher the larynx is in the throat, there are greater medializing forces just at rest. So the higher the larynx is in the throat, you do not have to work as hard to have adducted vocal folds, but the opposite is true as well. As the larynx goes down, the vocal folds are naturally going to unpress. And so you are right, Sarah. Having the like that kind of function sure is easier if you don't start right? And so understanding that laryngeal position follows general respiration strategy is actually a direct, like, functional approach to getting greater airflow. So that is a great observation, and I 100% agree. Um, Carmel says, so the subglottal pressure and vocal fold resistance shape pitch, loudness, and vocal quality. Then Angelina said, as I understand, it's also supraglottal pressure and relation to vocal fold closure. That is exactly right. So there are these wild oscillations of pressure that take place above the glottis and below the glottis. And then there's muscular involvement as well to sort of manage the shaping of that flow pulse. I think that we spend a lot of time being confused about supraglottal pressure and its role in phonation, like what we might call formant tuning or the acoustic forces. We should keep in mind if that were the sole nonlinear actor in the way it is that we produce self-sustaining oscillation in the voice, we would only be able to do that at integer multiples, right? And there sure seems to be nice nonlinear effects that take place at low pitches. There sure seem to be nice nonlinear effects that really have more to do with how the vocal tract itself is catching the flow pulse than what the returning pressure wave in the vocal tract is doing. So this is a both and I actually distinguish between these two things in the book, is just understanding resonance as like a global phenomenon, and then understanding the acoustic, what we might call the acoustic forces that have to do with the timing of that standing wave and the contacting of the vocal folds. I think it is incredibly confusing. And I think it is confusing for many of the reasons that I lay out in chapter 2 of this book for how it is that the voice pedagogy world tends to understand voice science. So yes, that is true. I think this does point to what chiaroscuro is, Florence, 100%. Right? It is bright darkness. And so, literally, in the word is the assumption that there are qualitatively opposing qualities that are simultaneously present. I think I got through all of those questions. The labs, I would encourage you go to my website, embodiedmusiclab.com. You will also find links to the book. Roman and Littlefield published it, so it's available through their website. It's on various countries, Amazons. I Google it every couple days, and a whole bunch of book selling websites come up that I don't know the names of. So if you just Google it, hopefully you'll be able to find one that is both close to you for shipping and also aligns with your ethical values. My website, Embodied Music Lab, has a section under the resources tab that is the hearing singing online resources. It's free, you just have to register for it. But even if you don't have the book, you could go and work through these labs. I ease you into both Voce Vista Video Pro and also Pratt. These are great applications, and I encourage everybody, if they're a little bit nervous about that, I encourage you to challenge yourself and gain some skill with that. I also have an entire page that lays out, if you wanted to capture your own sounds, here it is how you can understand how to like record something approaching laboratory grade recordings so that you can then do something with them.
So that is one of my favorite things about you, Ian, is your your drive, ability, and determination to democratize this knowledge for all of us.
Oh
You're
my God.
helping us put our hands on it, put our ears on it. And again, it's a great book to read, but I really want to recommend to anybody who has a copy, please follow through with a lab or two, or three, or four, or five, or six, or seven.
It took a lot of time to make them.
But hearing, what we're doing is process, it's hearing singing, and so you must activate your ears while you read about this stuff, in my opinion. We probably could have a deaf person read this and maybe it would make sense, but activating this modality along with this modality is key, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would say too, Dan, I appreciate you pointing out that character trait slash flaw that I think anybody can do these things. I really think I do legitimate voice research and I co-publish and publish things, and that's fine. But I think the population of people that comes up with the best questions about what we should explore vis-a-vis how the singing voice works, the population that comes up with the best questions are the practitioners, like full stop. And I think a lot of people say, great, I'm a practitioner, I am just going to make friends with an incredibly brilliant voice scientist, and then we are going to collaborate together. And I think the problem is most of them already have PhD students, and if you come to want to collaborate with them and like you don't know what intensity is, like it's not collaboration, it's mentorship at that point. So I think anything any of us can do to try to slowly level up our ability to start using some of these tools and ask what are really distinct and specific questions because we understand the material with nuance. Like anything we can do to move in that direction, it is only going to make you a better fantasy collaborator for that future research project that you might work on. So I just encourage everybody, do not be afraid of this stuff. Pratt is free. Download Pratt. Just literally watch my videos, walk through it, download the scripts, and download the sound samples that I've put up, and just start playing. You might be surprised what you're capable of.
Okay, Debbie, I think that's our time.
Thank you so much. Do you have any workshops coming up?
Oh
You
yeah,
directly,
thanks
Ian?
for asking that. I really appreciate that, Debbie. Yes, so my friend, mentor, and colleague Ken Bozeman is on the call right now. Myself and Chadley Ballantyne, along with an assortment of excellent additional faculty members, are running the Acoustic Vocal Pedagogy Workshop this summer. It has two forms. We would welcome any of you who would like to come and join us in July in DeLand, Florida. That's at Stetson University, which is where Chadley teaches. If y'all don't know Chadley's work, he's tremendous. Great teacher and like really amazing ideas about how it is we perceive vibration. That is going to be in July in person, and that's like from Sunday, July 20th through Friday, July 25th. It is a great intense week of some knowledge and information transfer, a lot of demonstrations, a ton of observed teaching, and just the fellowship that comes from nerdy people being in the same place together. If you are unable to travel to the United States, we also offer a robust online course. I look forward to this every single summer. And that basically takes the form of, I want to say it's about like 8 or 10 hours of asynchronous videos that you can watch within like a threaded chat community. And then from like July 9th through the beginning of July, Ken, Chadley, and myself have open chunks of office hour time. And so people just sign up, and it's all small group stuff, and it'll be like a different thing to talk about every time. And we do observable online lessons for those 3 weeks as well. So we invite anybody who is interested in doing some professional development this summer, please take a look at both of those options. And you can find that at embodiedmusiclab.com as well.
And yes, Ken, very good point. Jonathan workshop in St Andrews,
Yes.
which quite frankly, you can't even go on holiday for that far. So you go and stay in these beautiful surroundings. Incredible. Do you want to tell us are you on there? Do you want to do a quick shout out to who you got on?
That's
John?
very sweet of you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm in the kitchen cooking, well as listening to you guys. Thank you so much. We have Ginevra Williams, and we have Chris Johnson, and we have Lynn Helding for a week. So whatever your flavour, I think we've got something to help. It's going to be a great week, and we're very much looking forward to it. And I'm just enormously grateful when Ken came over a couple of years ago. It's a great week for meeting of minds and nerds, frankly. Thank you for the plug, Debbie.
You're welcome. What I'll do is we are going to send the recording out. What people are saying, are you going to send the recording out? They want to rewatch it. We are recording it. We will send it out to every single participant, and I'll also include the week as well as Ian's acoustic pedagogy workshops. So you've got no excuse to sign up.
Lovely. And we're also, Debbie is going to do a random drawing from everybody who came today, and we're going to send a copy of the book to one lucky person. And if you've already bought it, Christmas gifts for your children, it's great.
And finally, everyone, have a wonderful World Voice Day. Sing something. It's good for you.
Wonderful. Mwah. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.